Hey folks, this is Jake with Seattle Coffee Gear, and today we're going to be showing you how to clean your Eureka grinder. We have a specialita here, but this also applies for the Perfetto, the Silenzio, the Notte, and most of the Mignon size of Eureka grinders. I do have a Faustino here just to show that the actual burr removal and cleaning and the chute cleaning is quite similar on the Faustino. So if you have a Faustino, watching this video could help you get your grinder nice and clean or unclogged. So when we have a grinder like this, especially one with stepless adjustment, a lot of times what can happen is that you either instantly clog the grinder, maybe you made an adjustment when it wasn't running, or just you went too coarse too quickly and it clogged up and backed up, or too fine too quickly. And the symptoms of that typically are when you start the grinder, you're going to see on the specialita the timer counting down, or if you don't have a timer on your grinder, you can actually hear it clicking, but there's obviously no coffee being ground in here. The burrs are not spinning, which means it's likely clogged up further back. So when that happens, a thorough cleaning can help, and a normal thermal cleaning every 2 or 3 months, depending on how oily your coffee beans are, is always a great idea to keep your grinder in tip-top shape. So to get started, I have a few tools here, which you're going to want to have as well. I have a couple different grinder brushes. These are a very firm bristled and a slightly softer bristled brush, just to get those burrs nice and squeaky clean. I have a flathead and a Phillips screwdriver. You want the flathead to be relatively flat and thin, but also kind of wide to get the lower burrs off. The Phillips is a pretty standard size Phillips. I also have a 2mm Allen key / hex key. This is going to be to remove a couple of the pieces in the rear of the grinder when we're popping off the top plate. And I also have an adjustable wrench. We're going to want that if you are doing your lower burr removal. If you're not going to be removing your lower burr, maybe you have just a light cleaning that you're wanting to do, not a full cleaning, you probably won't need this because you can still get the upper burr off without it. So, first things first, I'm going to go ahead and turn off my grinder and unplug it. And then I've already taken the coffee beans out of this hopper, but you'd want to close your hopper chute, take it off, then you would dump them out, and then take your grinder and just upside down over like a trash bin. Just give it a slight shake so that you can get most of the bean residues out of there. We are also going to be using a vacuum a little later on, so that will be good enough to get these beans out later on as well. There we go. So, first things first, you're going to want to flip your grinder around, and you'll see there's a little Eureka logo / shield on the back. Most of the times this can be just popped off with your fingernail. If you can't get it, try a paper clip or a very thin flat-headed screwdriver, but most of the time it just pops right off. And this is where the 2mm hex key comes in handy, because you're going to want to go ahead and unscrew this so that you can get the top plate off. And one thing to note when you're doing your cleaning here, once you get into the grinder, there are quite a few places where you can accidentally drop the screws. So if you do have a magnetic screwdriver, it would be pretty helpful so that you don't drop those down. Otherwise, be really careful. If you do drop something down into the interior of the grinder, you can get it out, but it's a little like losing a piece in when you're doing, maintenance on your car. It's going to fall down there. It's going to be a real treasure hunt to go find that screw, and it's better to just not lose it in the first place if you can avoid it. So I've gotten the rear screw taken out, and that is the only thing that holds on this top plate. So you can just go ahead and lift up, and you just need to slide it off of the adjustment knob, and there's a little locking notch up front, and we can go ahead and set that aside. And now you're actually into the interior of your grinder. So what I'm going to be doing first is removing the upper burr, vacuuming everything out, and then we're going to be doing the lower burr, and a little bit later we're going to be doing the chute removal for the front of the grinder and the anti-clogging system or anti-clumping system. So this is where the Phillips screwdriver, you're going to want to start using that. So there's 3 Phillips screws on the top of the burr carrier. So we're going to go ahead and remove those. And I'm going to set these aside. And with that, your top burr carrier should come right off. And you can see here, our burrs here are pretty dirty. So this is going to be a really nice cleaning to have for this grinder. So go ahead and set your top burr aside. Usually you want to put it near the screws that it came with, just to keep everything organized. And in here, you're going to see the lower burr and a lot of ground coffee residue, which I'm going to vacuum up really quickly just to get nice and neat. And then we're going to go ahead and start removing the lower burr. So a vacuum with a hose attachment such as this one, super helpful in this case because then you can get all around here. If you don't have a vacuum, you can use your grinder brush and you can just brush it out, dump it, brush it out, dump it, or a little bit of compressed air goes a long way in this situation as well. Alrighty, so that cleared up most of the particulate matter from here, and there is a little bit of residue still in the screw holes, which we're going to need to take out. Usually you will see this, especially if you haven't cleaned your grinder in a while or ever. So I'm going to use my softer bristle brush just to see if I can get this out. You just want to loosen it up, especially if you have a vacuum or compressed air. As long as we're loosening up all these coffee oils and coffee particulates, your next round of vacuuming will go ahead and take care of this. What we're really trying to do is just free up the screw so that you can actually access it with your screwdriver. And we're going to go ahead and vacuum again. All right, so we have our screws nice and freed up now. So you're going to want to go ahead and take your flathead screwdriver, and this is where the adjustable wrench comes in because we are going to be removing the lower burr. You're going to want to set it, you can use a standard wrench, a fixed wrench, but I find an adjustable wrench most people have around in the house. And you're going to want to set it as wide as this brass collar here right in the center, because otherwise, if you don't, what's going to happen is when you try to screw this, the burrs are going to free spin and you're never going to be able to get those screws out. So we use this so that it locks it in place. Just provide a little bit of tension so that you can get your screwdriver in the screw hole. Make sure it's nice and tight. And then it's super easy to get those screws out. And with these screws, the lower burr screws, there's not a whole lot of risk of losing them. So if you have that magnetic screwdriver, they'll pull right out. But if you don't, I'll show you what to do in just a moment. So just go ahead and if you have those screws nice and loose, you can just take your fingernail, work your way under there. There generally is enough room to just go ahead and pull those out one by one. Alright, so I've got those 3 screws set aside, and now comes probably the trickiest part of getting the whole grinder cleaned. The lower burrs, especially if you've never cleaned them or have never removed them, are going to be a little bit stuck on there. They're really firmly wedged in place into the four pieces of the lower burr carrier, and it's going to take a little bit of force to get these out. If you're removing your burrs and replacing them with new burrs, that's going to be okay to kind of nick those burrs or scratch them as you're pulling them out. But if you're just cleaning, what you're going to want to do is be gentle but forceful in using a tool like a screwdriver or a wedge of some sort. Like a flathead screwdriver is a nice wedge to use to pry it out from all three corners, as I'm going to show you right here. And this process, especially if it's new, might take 3-4 minutes. So don't worry, just keep applying force, get it out there on each of the three sides, and it will eventually come out. All right, so it's starting to come out now. You'll feel it because it's starting to kind of lift off the burr carrier each side, one side at a time, and eventually it will pretty much loosen up to the point at where you can go ahead and remove it. We've almost got it now. And you can just use a flathead once you got a lip under here to give yourself a lot more leverage. And we have the lower burr. The lower burr typically is a little bit cleaner than the upper burr because it is the burr that is actually spinning when the grinder is in motion. And there are going to be some pretty caked on pieces though in the screw holes that we'll want to take care of in a bit. So now that we've got the upper and lower burr off, it is time to vacuum again to get all this particulate matter out of the lower burr carrier. And if you can't get it all off in one go, there's always going to be, because coffee is such an oily product, there's always going to be little bits and pieces that get stuck in there. Especially if you want your grinder pristine, you're going to want to take that grinder brush that you have, or any firm bristled brush, and just work your way through the interior of the lower burr carrier, making sure to get the fins, which are the little pieces that actually hold the burr in place. And you can see we've loosened up all the coffee particulate matter in here. And I'm just going to go ahead and give it one more vacuuming to make sure it's nice and clean. And there you have it. Pretty much a pristine lower burr carrier. There's always going to be a few bits and pieces of coffee, but just do your best because we're really just trying to get this as clean as we can get it. So I'm actually going to go ahead and set aside the grinder right now, and we're going to take a look at these burrs and get them all cleaned up. So I find that the easiest way to do this is to set these on a cloth because you are going to be brushing ground coffee off of them, and it is nice to have a surface which you can just brush and get dirty without dirtying up the counter. Take a firm grinder brush. You can start with a softer one, but a lot of times it does take a firmer brush. And just go ahead and start with the back. Just brush the whole back side off. And then I like to go at it from the sides. I'm going to go ahead and use the firmer brush for some of the more stuck-on particulates. Got the sides nice and clean. And now for the top, and making sure that all of the holes are nice and clean, that the screws rest into. And a lot of people do ask when they are replacing their burrs or cleaning out their burrs is, can you wash these instead of, going through the manual process? And I would not suggest it. You really do want to just take something dry. You don't want to add any moisture to the interior of your grinder. Even if you do dry these out thoroughly, especially because they are metal, we just want to keep them as pristine as possible, and giving them just a nice brush down is usually the best way to do this. And for these holes in where the screws lay, something like a cotton swab, for like cosmetics is really great to get into this here. You might need a couple, but it's a really great tool to actually get a lot of this caked on coffee out, because it's going to be a lot more caked on than you'd expect. And then once you're done with the lower burr, just go ahead and give it a nice wipe just to get any coffee particulate matter off. And there we have a pretty clean 55mm specialty burr. So I'm going to go ahead and set that aside. Right next to the screws, you can see here how different the before and after, even though these are different burrs, just how different, once you get them cleaned up, they are. So now I'm going to go ahead and clean the upper burr. If you were going to be replacing your burrs at this point, you would take your lower burr, just go ahead and replace that. And you're going to see that once we get this all cleaned up, there's 3 screw holes here, and they're going to be pretty dirty. Do the same thing like you did with these. Unscrew it, pop this burr off, pop a new one on, and there's your brand new upper burr. But we're just going to be cleaning this today. So same exact process as the last time. Take the back, make sure you get around the inlet where the coffee beans actually funnel in. And now for the burr, go around the sides. It looks like on this upper burr we actually do have a bean particle lodged into the top of this. Most of the times you can just pop those off, but you can use, like a screwdriver just to break it up, or a firmer grinder brush, and that should break it up just fine. And because on the upper burr the screws are in place, if you're not removing the burr, it is going to be more difficult to get those coffee particles out of there. Ideally, we want it to be as clean as you can get it. If it's not pristine, you know, it's going to be dirty again the next time you grind your coffee, but we want to remove those caked on particles because the cleaner your burrs are, the more consistent your grind will be, and it will also improve the lifespan of your burrs. So there we have it. I'm going to give it just a little wipe off here. And compared to how we started, these are nice and clean. There's still a little bit of coffee residue stuck in those screw holes. If I really wanted to get it out, you can vacuum it, but it's usually pretty compacted in there. You can try and remove the screws and give it another brushing if you really do want it as clean as possible. But this should be great for now. So, now the two burrs are now done. We're going to go ahead and move on to the chute in the next part of this video. What the burr cleaning will do for you is typically get minor clogs, daily cleaning, or weekly cleaning. You know, not daily, you probably wouldn't need to be doing this daily, but weekly, bi-weekly, or even monthly, depending on how dark your beans are. Getting that upper burr off and at least vacuuming off is going to be great maintenance for your grinder. But if it's really clogged, or you know, you were working on it and after cleaning these burrs, the clog had not cleared, or you still want to clean the rest of your grinder, go ahead and continue watching this video for when we get to the chute cleaning, and we'll go ahead and show you how to do that in just a moment. All right, so if you've already cleaned your burrs and you've gotten them completely cleaned up and you're good to go and that's all you want to do, what you want to do is just go ahead and take the lower burr, place it back in, 3 screws to tighten it down. Then you take your upper burr, place it back in, line it up with those screw holes, tighten that down, and take your top plate, make sure it latches back in, and then take your Allen keyed screw and replace it in the back of the grinder. But because we're going to be doing the chute cleaning, I wanted to keep these off just so you could see the interior of the grinder, and we'll be putting it back together at the end of this video. So, if you have a Mignon with the portafilter fork, go ahead and remove that. Some of them are screw-in. The Specialitas being adjustable, just comes right off. You can go ahead and set that aside. And what you're going to be looking for is a screw underneath the chute, as well as 2 screws on the interior of the grinder at each end of near the knob and on the other end of the grinder. They are both Phillips screws, and these are the screws where you do want to be careful, because now we're starting to talk about it's going to fall in the grinder if you drop them. So just be really careful, or have a magnetic screwdriver at your disposal. So I'm going to start with these 2 screws up top. And once you get it pretty close to loose, go ahead and remove that by hand. So I have the 2 screws out of the top now. And then you're going to do the one in the grinder chute that's holding it on right above the portafilter start and stop button. Luckily this screw cannot fall out of the grinder or into the grinder, so a little bit less pressure here. And we got that out. I just used my Allen key for a little bit of leverage there. And now the screen should pop right off. So it's kind of a lifting and pulling action on the Specialita. The screen latches on, so you'll feel it when it's ready to come off. So you lift from the top, and then you're going to get your leverage to slide off the screen. Be careful, this is the power wire for the screen. There's a little bit of extra give in here, but because the button's at the bottom and these are both plugged in, if you really wanted to remove the screen, you can unplug the connector at the bottom, or excuse me, at the top. But I like to just leave it in and set it aside as best you can. We can still get access to everything from right here. Next up, there is a little rubber gasket which just pulls right off, nice and easy. You can definitely rinse this along with this clear plastic chute once we take it off in some warm water, even soapy water if that's what you like, to get it nice and clean. Today I'm just going to go ahead and brush it off. So we have that nice and clean. And then we are going to take our vacuum and get some of these particulates out before trying to remove the clump crusher. That way it will be easier to actually get access to it. All right, so we're going to go ahead and remove the clump crusher now. It is pretty delicate and the pieces are made of thin metal. You're going to want to take a smaller Phillips screwdriver, if the one that you have before did not fit it, and gently take the screw from the front and just give it a few turns. And make sure that you grab the washer that comes off with it. So you have a little screw and washer. And here is our clump crusher. Just two thin pieces of metal. In fact, ours is bent just a little bit. You can go ahead and straighten that out. These do get bent over time, especially if you have some larger particles that have been coming out of your grinder. You want them to be pretty straight here. And as you can see from inside the chute, that is a lot of ground coffee that is in there. So what we want to do is, if you have a vacuum with a nozzle attachment, it's really nice and easy to get that taken care of before you remove the actual chute. But a screwdriver or a brush works very well in this case. And you can kind of push it out from behind as well. So that's clean. If you wanted to remove your chute now, the actual plastic chute, go ahead and take your Phillips screwdriver. And this is where we need to be very, very careful, because these are what I have found to be the easiest screws to drop into the body of the grinder. How I prevent that typically is that you want to put forward pressure pulling away from the body of the grinder as you're unscrewing, just as the screws are starting to get loose. It helps to pull them out instead of letting them fall back down when you get the chute out. So I'm going to loosen each one up. So I'm taking my actual fingers and pushing it away from the body of the grinder, just so when things start to loosen up, So that right side is taken care of. Left side is taken care of. Tilt it up, the screws will fall back into place, and there is your actual grind chute. Go ahead and rinse that off, take a brush to it, whatever you feel like doing. And we are now at the final stage of cleaning your grinder, your Specialita. Underneath, there's just a little bit of caked on dirt or caked on coffee that actually falls underneath the lower burr carrier. There's definitely gaps where particles can fall. So we're going to want our vacuum one last time to vacuum those out. I'm also going to take just a little brush, tilt my grinder forward. You don't have to do this. Just kind of brush those particles right out. And there we have a fully cleaned Specialita. Now, of course, once you're doing this, you might as well clean up some of the accessories and bits. You can clean out the bean hopper. Over time, you do get oil in the bean hopper accumulating. And there's a couple of good ways to wash this. Some nice hot water and a little bit of scrubbing is a great way. But I've actually seen some people clean these out with the steam on from their espresso machine. Steam cleaning is a very powerful tool that people use for cleaning all sorts of things. And when we've tried it on different hoppers, we found that it actually does a really great job at removing oil. So what you do is just take a towel, place it under here, take your steam on from your espresso machine, open that valve, and very carefully get steam applied to each corner, wipe out, and you are good to go. So another thing that you can clean when you are also doing the grinder cleaning is just this top burr ring, the actual gasket that holds this, the hopper in place. You can just go ahead and wipe that down. This does pop off from the bottom. You can just remove it just like this. Give it a wash, pop it back on, and you're good to go. So now everything's all cleaned up. We're going to go ahead and go in reverse order to put the Specialita back in place. So the first thing you're going to have is the clear grinder chute. Be careful. I always hold these screws as much as I can in place as I'm pushing this in. Nice and tight. And then next comes the clump crusher. So for the clump crusher, you take your screw, the little tiny screw with the washer, and it's a little tricky because you really have to thread it through the hole first by spinning the screw. The hole's a little bit small, just push it right on in. I find it easier to do this way. And then put it back onto the hole where it came from. And then take your small screwdriver, Phillips screwdriver. And then just tighten that down, and we're good to go. Next up is going to be the black chute that pops over the top of this. It connects the two latches up top and then just fits into place just like this. and you're ready to replace the screen. So there's going to be a few pieces at the bottom of your screen that you're going to want to latch into place. And then you pull from the top, push down, make sure everything's nice and seated. And then I like to start with the larger screw from the front of the chute. Nice and tight. And then the two smaller screws from the top of the chute, the one near the adjustment dial and the one on the opposite side. And these ones are also a little bit smaller, so the smaller screwdriver from before may be helpful here. All right, so we've got the two screws back on here. So that means your chute and your screen for the special leader are all firmly attached. And now it's just time for the burrs. So we've already done our burr cleaning. So we've got nice clean burrs here. I'm going to pop those in. They go in a lot easier than they come out, luckily. Take your flathead screws, drop them in place. Make sure everything's all lined up. We're going to take our wrench from before to tighten the burr carrier down. And then go ahead and tighten down each screw. So that's the lower burr installed, nice and tight. Yep, nice and tight. We're going to take our upper burr carrier with the upper burr, line that up with the screws holes on top. And tighten each one of those down. So that's our burr installed. And now we just have to replace the top plate. So screw for the bean hopper lock goes in the rear of the grinder. Make sure the adjustment dial is right there. And it just wiggles right into place. You'll notice it pops up until you get the 2mm hex screw back into place. Go ahead and push that down and hold it. I'm just going to start the screw by hand. Then you take your 2mm hex while still holding this piece in place to make sure everything fits nice and snugly. And then we're just going to give it a turn until just past hand tight. Replace the Eureka logo. Replace your hopper. Replace your lid. And finally, for the Specialita, replace your portafilter fork. If you have a Silenzio or a Perfetto or anything else, the portafilter attachment might be a little different. You might need to screw it back in. So now we've got a nice clean Specialita, and we've gotten everything cleaned out from the grinder chute and the burrs and on back. So when you start to grind from a brand new clean grinder such as this, go ahead and take it a few turns coarser just to make sure that the burrs aren't too close when you replace them. If they're touching, they're still going to be seized up. But in this case, burrs are running and you're good to go. To get dialed back in, what I like to do is run the grinder until you hear the chirping of the burrs touching, and then 1, 2 full rotations, shut it off. Then you can place your beans right inside, open up the bean chute with the grinder running, and dial in from there. I do hope this has been a really informative video for you on how to clean your Eureka grinder. Don't forget, if you have a Faustino, the upper and lower burr carrier cleaning are identical once you get the screws off on the top. So this versatile cleaning is great for any of the lower adjust stepless grinders such as these. I do appreciate you watching, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.